The reason the need for the creation of this video was developed was because of the identification of the increasing worldwide questioning of the true nature of reality. Questions such as, 1, are we living in a simulation? 2, is the simulation part of God's imagination? 3, where did humans originally come from? Single-cell amoeba, horseshoe crabs, and so on. So we're looking for reasoning beyond the oversimplified reasoning and saying reality is simply what people perceive it to be. So the following 7 reasons are offered in an attempt to possibly explain the reason for this recent increase in worldwide questioning. So first possible reason, the increase in worldwide usage of cell phones, iPods, iPads, and overall increased exposure to artificial intelligence. 2, a seeming increase in worldwide political reordering, or at least widespread reconsidering of global political systems and orders. 3, an increase in worldwide disparity in the net worth of the 1% versus the remaining 99%. 4, the fourth reason, the increase in the man-made worldwide climate change narrative, which thusly naturally has had a negative effect on worldwide human morale, given that the message is that humans are exhaling a damaging, poisoning gas upon the earth, which may be planting psychological seeds of self-hatred that in many cases manifest into subconscious and even conscious suicidal impulses and desires. The fifth possible reason is the increase in the automation of jobs, which results in the increase in humans questioning the future worth of a human. 6, the increase in global population and the associated decrease in the perceived value and worth of a human, given the more of something there is, then the less that something is valued. And 7, all the gender identification confusion seemingly being propagated by massive institutions within the various levels of our education system, the mass media, the Hollywood and Hollywood movie production systems. So given this increased trend in the questioning of these fundamental ideas, perhaps it is high time that the Vitruvian Man is revisited for in-depth analysis, given that the Vitruvian Man is one of the most timeless, enigmatic, and captivating creations of one of time's greatest minds in Leonardo da Vinci, and the so-called Da Vinci Code may still remain a mystery. Incidentally, 2019 marks the 500th anniversary of the death of Leonardo da Vinci, so perhaps this is enough reason to entertain this deeper look, especially into why the outline of geometric shapes could be identified surrounding the left and the right eyes of the Vitruvian Man in the shape of an inverted equilateral triangle and more circular shape, respectively, to the left and the right eye. The shading. So even if there is the outline of the archetype geometric shapes of the equilateral triangle, you can really see it here, obviously, in different contrasts. And here's it accentuated, but it's naturally there. This is what he did. I just highlighted what is there. You can see it, really see it there. And there you go. So even if there is the outline of the archetype geometric shapes of the equilateral triangle and the circle surrounding the left and the right eyes of the Vitruvian Man, what would it matter towards anyway? Well, on the path towards attempting to solve that riddle, of which Da Vinci may have left for us to solve, the following 2 quotations are offered from sacredgeometry.com and the Wikipedia webpage titled Sacred Geometry, respectively. So quotation 1 is the following. In nature, we find patterns, designs, and structures from the most minuscule particle to expressions of life discernible by the human eyes to the greater cosmos. These inevitably follow geometric archetypes which reveal the nature of each form and its vibrational resonance. And the second quotation is from Wikipedia. The belief that a God created the universe to a geometric plan has ancient origins. Plutarch, an ancient Greco-Roman biographer, attributed the belief to Plato, writing that Plato said God geometrizes continually. This video was created while working under the assumption that it is highly possible that Da Vinci shared with Plato this same geometric perspective regarding God geometrizing, is that how you say it? Geometrizing continually, hence the usage of the term sacred geometry. It is theorized that a sacred geometrist would naturally work to understand the mysteries of God and the psychological or mental design of the universe through the archetype geometric shapes rather than through language, as has historically been done through different cultures around the world over time. But no matter the particular historical culture across time, and no matter the various diverse languages in play, the common factor is the human mind, obviously, and the duality or bipolarity involved, in that there's only two poles to electricity, positive, negative, right? So, anyway, and perhaps the term bipolar is a more apt term to use than duality when describing and imagining the phenomenon of the two opposite and opposing metaphysical forces existing within the same thing, whatever that thing may be, given it is observed that these two forces are always identified as extreme polar opposites. I mean, assuming it's not flat Earth, I mean, even the Earth has two poles, two sides to every argument, positive, negative, heavy, light, anyway, on and on and on. You can imagine it. Extreme polar opposites, two poles, right? So no matter what part of the world any particular thing is observed, this is universal law, as we all understand it. The following 6 approaches of psychological mentality and or metaphysical philosophy, of which have stood the test of time, describe in their own unique ways this the archetype dueling force of opposite and opposing polarities. So these following 6 approaches do it in languages and words, where sacred geometrists would do it in geometric shapes, in the opposite opposing geometric shapes of an equilateral triangle and a circle. That'll be explained coming up. But the 6 historical approaches all around the world that have stood the test of time include Chinese philosophy, calling it yin-yang, Abrahamic philosophy, calling it good and evil, Buddhist philosophy, calling it eternalism and annihilationism, Hermeticists call it above and below, the native North American approach sees it as light and dark, the New Age approach calls it positive and negative, while during the Renaissance, enlightenment trumped darkness, and sacred geometry observes it as the pattern behavioral shape of a circle and an equilateral triangle. This logically means that the circle is the geometric symbol to represent the non-physical realm or spiritual realm, and the equilateral triangle is the geometric symbol representing the metaphysical opposite and opposing polarity to the physical realm. The circle, the equilateral triangle represents the physical realm, and the circle identifies the spiritual realm. That's what I'm trying to say. This makes sense given that no geometric archetype shape is more basic and less dynamic than the equilateral triangle, in that no such shape has fewer equal length straight edge sides than the equilateral triangle. This would represent the extreme polar negative of archetype geometric shapes. But if one more equal length straight edge side is gained or added to the equilateral triangle, to such the equilateral triangle, then one more angle of dynamism is gained, and we get one step closer to the circle. Eternalism, right? Because if you keep adding another straight edge side, you get a square and a pentagon, hexagon, septagon, octagon, and it keeps circling out. And eventually you get like an eternal number of straight edge sides. Does the circle have 0 straight edge sides? An eternal amount of straight edge sides, and that's eternalism in Buddhism, right? The opposite is annihilationism, triangulate, murder. That's annihilationism in the opposite of eternalism in the Hindi Buddhist. Anyway, I apologize for that little rant. So the circle is the extreme polar maximum, or positive. The circle is the opposite and opposing geometric archetype shape to that of the equilateral triangle. in that no such shape has more equal length straight edge sides than that of the circle, in that, it's just what I said, sorry, I got ahead of myself. Circle has an infinite number of straight edge sides, or 0 straight edge sides, hence the spiritual, eternal, and infinitely mysterious nature of the geometric archetype shape of the circle. So I'm going to stop here. So the polar minimum of negative polarity of geometric archetype shape is the equilateral triangle, in that it has the fewest straight edge sides and the number 3, 1, 2, 3, obviously. And then one more side is added, square, and so on, a pentagon, hexagon, octagon. Then we can really see it circling out as you get to, the octagon is looking very circular. So that's that. That's adding dynamism from the basic equilateral triangle, the most basic shape to the most dynamic shape. Every time you add an equal length side, right? So you just infinity circle, infinite number of straight edge sides, or 0. It's like blow your mind. So if the equilateral triangle symbolically also represents the physical realm, while the circle symbolically represents the metaphysical polar opposite in the spiritual realm, this can really well be highlighted and observed within Christianity, Christian symbology of the Christian cross compared with the halo. Stop. In that the halo it takes on the eternal spiritual realm shape of circle, while this Christian cross has an extrapolated outline perimeter in the form of an inverted, as you can see. You take this point, you take the 4 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you just draw it all like this and go like that. So inverted equilateral triangle, which incidentally is the precise form and shape surrounding the left eye of the Vitruvian Man. I'll bring this in quickly. As we can see that, bingo, Anyway, that, so there you go. So the Christian cross may be an ultimate physical symbol to remind a human mind of the imagery and memory of the ultimate physical sacrifice and suffering so extreme that it is archetypal imagery, shape, and symbolism that has stood, 2,000 plus years, obviously. It can keep present in the mind of a human the dangers of allowing a human mind to call excessively for order in our physical realm. Of course, obsessive control freaks tend to be left brain dominant. And incidentally, Da Vinci surrounded the left brain dominant left eye of the Vitruvian Man with that outline shape, looking out. The Vitruvian Man looking out. It's over his left hemisphere of his brain, over his left eye. And that incidentally, it's the same shape as that. Oh, shit. Yeah. So that's the same as, obviously, that there. Anyway. So, and of course, obsessive control freaks nailed Jesus Christ to the cross in pursuit of to excessively call for order in this, our physical realm, for humanity. So in an effort to summarize this idea, let's recap the following 6 points, I guess. Most likely, left brain dominant control freaks sought the destruction of Jesus Christ. Da Vinci shaded the outline shape of the extrapolated outline shape of the Christian cross in the inverted equilateral triangle surrounding the left eye of the Vitruvian Man in front of the left hemisphere of the human mind. The left hemisphere of the human mind is theorized to be ultimately concerned with our physical realm, while the right hemisphere of the human mind is ultimately concerned with that of the opposite and opposing polarity in that of the spiritual or non-physical realm. The fourth summary point here is, given that so much darkness and horror has manifested in the physical realm here on earth over time, as individual and collective left hemispheres of the human mind have called for and sought for excessive order and control over others in this physical realm here on Earth. This is considered evidence that the left hemisphere of the left hemisphere is theorized to be the source of all darkness or dark impulses, where its opposite and opposing mind in the right hemisphere of human mind is theorized to be the source of all enlightenment. Number 5, summary point: the darkness of the left hemisphere of human mind is the source of all impulses related to self-centeredness, selfishness, sexual impulse, narcissistic impulse, and self-obsession in the physical sense. In the unbalanced sense, you need the right hemisphere to balance out that. So the unbalanced sense of self-obsession is like nature worship of self, given the left hemisphere is theorized to be concerned with all things of our physical realm. And also impulses of self-survival. Obviously you need to balance that out, otherwise you're going to go cuckoo, right? Solipsistic impulse. While children are naturally more innocently solipsistic, the solipsistic adult mind of much more life experience and mental power would potentially be much more dangerously solipsistic. And number 6 and final summary point: the enlightenment of the right hemisphere of the human mind is theorized to be the source of all impulses of the opposite and opposing metaphysical force to the left, so the right, the higher dimensionality, I guess. So it's related to all the impulses of selflessness as opposed to selfishness of the left physical realm. So selflessness, sharing, spiritual desires of higher dimensionality, theorized principles of enlightenment philosophy, angelic guidance, and so on. So this whole video is obviously part of a theory, and there's 12 assumptions to this revisited approach to observing the Vitruvian Man on the 500th posthumous anniversary of Leonardo in 2019. These 12 assumptions are based on the ultimate possibility of, or the asking of the question that since there are two distinct hemispheres of the human brain, could there exist two separate subconscious minds? Meaning in the mental alchemical sense, or the pan-psychic sense, where one subconscious mind, perhaps the left hemisphere, is of and psychically connected with the realms or here, third dimension, and below, second, first dimension, whatever that is. While one subconscious mind, the opposite, in the right hemisphere, is of and psychically connected to this our here dimension, third and above, whatever that is. Just a theory. Obviously, a quick note that Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary defines panpsychism as the theory that all nature has a psychic aspect, and that every physical happening participates in mentality. So getting back to the main theory, this would naturally mean that the subconscious the mind associated to the left hemisphere of the human mind is associated with the source of all things of darkness, that manifests into impulses of excessive order, in our physical realm. This would also naturally mean that the subconscious mind of the opposite and opposing hemisphere of human mind in the right hemisphere of the human mind is associated with the source of all things of enlightenment, the opposite of darkness. What brought us out of the dark ages in the West? Enlightenment. So maybe that's where it comes from. And the right hemisphere, associated with the manifestation of, spiritual expression, perhaps even in a seemingly excessively, spiritually chaotic manner if it's not balanced up by the left here in the physical. If you get too spiritual, right? So the balance. And Da Vinci, you're going to draw a line through it later, and the thing tilts to the right, you'll see. So balance, obviously, tilting towards the right. And the theory is that the human conscience is in the right, somehow, hemisphere, subconscious. So, but we're going to get to that. This theory could create the idea that the opposite opposing poles of hemispheric mind are capable somehow with interfacing with the two opposite and opposing metaphysical forces, darkness and enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, It's called different things all around the world, of which every cultural philosophy is previously identified and addressed over time, as we discussed earlier, in Chinese, Abrahamic, Hindu, Buddhist, whatnot. The sacred geometrists would identify this. So the sacred geometrists would identify what people have historically identified in language, this bipolar duality of metaphysical dualistic force, as the behavioral form or behavioral shape of the equilateral triangle versus that of the circle. These are the shapes of the pattern behavior of these two subconscious minds in theory. And given that all that is perceived comes from the human mind or is of mentality, this could explain why there exists a I guess pan means worldwide, panpsychism, right? This could explain why there exists a cultural fixation or near dependence or obsession with which everything else is built upon, and that's what archetype, I guess, comes from. Everything's built upon that, and it's like triangle and circle. These are complete polar opposites. In the middle, you got all these other shapes, and so on. This is the idea of sacred geometry, in terms of psychology or spirit, whatever we're talking about here. I apologize for rambling. So the following 12 assumptions relating to this reproach to the analysis of the Vitruvian Man were established while working under the assumption that since the Vitruvian Man is mainly recognized for showcasing the physical observations discovered over 1,400 years ago, 1,400 years before Da Vinci was born, a guy, the ancient Roman architect Marcus Vitruvius Polo. So we're saying the Vitruvian Man wasn't just created to reintroduce or honor Vitruvius. We're looking for hidden meaning. So this theory is based upon the idea that Da Vinci created and conceptualized the Vitruvian Man to display messaging on mathematical symmetries and patterns observed in both the physical and non-physical realm. So Vitruvius, Marcus Vitruvius Polo, created his Vitruvian. His thing was all about the physical, which we'll discuss. But the idea is that Da Vinci worked in both the physical and non-physical realms, that he identified a dualistic connection between the physical and non-physical realms of a panpsychic manner, where the physical and non-physical realms are conceptualized as opposite and opposing polarities of the same thing, the thing panpsychically being the entirety of the cosmos, encompassing our full respective and collective human experience, including the realms of the non-physical mental, possibly being the gateway of the spiritual, as opposed to the physical. I apologize for the rambling. So assumption 1, that his intention for the drawing of the archetype geometric shape of the circle within the Vitruvian Man is for it to be metaphorically, macrocosmically interpreted as the spiritual realm of our existence, of here and above. Given that A, the man makes connection with the perimeter of the circle with both his hands and feet in this X pose, theorizing to signify a pose of a more chaotic and of free spiritual expression. B, the fact that the mathematical center point of the circle is the man's navel or gut region, while considering the metaphysical significance of the expression "trust your gut." Assumption 2, that the circle in the Vitruvian Man is also intended to metaphorically, microcosmically represent the behavioral pattern shape of the right hemisphere of the brain, theorized to be of the unconscious or subconscious mind and realm. So this is, drawing it over to accentuate what's, you see it. And he put it there, man, and it's more dark here, sinister, dark in the right eye, more enlightened in the left eye, more dark and sinister, more enlightened, darkness in the left, enlightenment in the right, enlightenment, darkness, and this is it. It's an equilateral triangle. Let's see it. Anyway, more circular on the right, enlightenment. So, yeah. Assumption 3, that if sacred geometrics identifies the right hemisphere of the subconscious, unconscious, it's the same thing, sorry, unconscious, subconscious, obviously, so if sacred geometrics identifies that the right hemisphere of the unconscious brain or mind forms and behavioral displays the archetypal pattern geometric shape of a circle, then logically its opposite and opposing counterpart in the unconscious left hemisphere of the brain behaviorally forms and displays the archetypal pattern geometric shape of the equilateral triangle, given the following reasons. The left hemisphere has scientifically proven to relate to a human's most basic concerns and functions, meaning pertaining to those of the physical realm, including but not limited to language, logic, reasoning, and calculation. It's like a computer, right? Or maybe not, whatever. But in other words, this could be interpreted as this quote, cheeky little quote. The left hemisphere of the brain is the genesis of impulses sent to the body that perpetually sirens to logically perceive the physical universe of its immediate observation and surrounding, in order to calculate how they can manage, strategize, and reason towards getting theirs physically more and more as each moment passes. Obviously, it needs to be balanced by the right hemisphere, right? Otherwise, you become an animal. Which could be said that which could be said to all involve impulses of triangulating upon anything it physically desires, right? Left hemisphere, without the balance of the right, the temperance of the right. B, that the equilateral triangle is the most basic, absolutely symmetrical geometric archetype shape, in that no such shape has fewer equal length straight edge sides. And C, that the comparison between the demands for the physical order of the left, the hemisphere, and the calls for the opposite and spiritual chaotic expression of the theorized to be of the right, unconscious, never ending, they're always there for every human mind, are of opposite and opposing metaphysical polarities, just as is opposite and opposing are the nature polarity of the geometric archetype shapes of the equilateral triangle and the circle. Sorry if it's boring. Assumption 4, that because the great psychoanalyst Carl Jung stated that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And he quoted, unconscious mind of man sees correctly even when conscious reason is blind and impotent. That's the end of the quote. This offers reasoning for why this theory contends that Da Vinci identified that the circle and the equilateral triangle represent the unconscious opposite and opposing pattern behavioral shapes of the right and the left hemisphere of the brain of the mind, and not the conscious mind and realm. So Carl Jung, yeah. Assumption 5, that the square in the Vitruvian Man was drawn to metaphorically represent the physical realm of our existence within the schematic, for the following 3 reasons. 1, given that the man makes connection with the perimeter of the square with both his hands and feet in the more physically ordered, like Christ pose, as we said earlier, right? That's more physical than compared to the spiritual expression of the opposite X pose. 2, given that the dimensions for the perimeter of a square is usually, this is what Vitruvius 2,000 years ago, pointed out, it's probably, so usually is naturally formed when the physical dimensions of the human body are measured against themselves in terms of length by height, meaning a measure of a body's wingspan perpendicular to the measure of its height, right? So we all know that, wingspan, height, same box. But that's not the only, so the idea is that's not the only reason Da Vinci did this, just to do what Vitruvius did. Although Vitruvius was a freaking genius also, or whatever. Who knows? The 3, given that the mathematical center point of the square within the Vitruvian Man schematic is the man's reproductive organ, which is considered to offer evidence for this theory, given that men, historically, much of the time, have been identified as being physically led by this organ as a center point or engine, for lack of a better term, for their conscious patterns in the physical realm, right? Square, whatever. For their conscious patterns of thought, given that in order for the human species to continue, reproduction is of paramount importance. In other words, if men cease to be led in certain specific ways by their reproductive organ as a center point for conscious thought of sorts at very specific times, in the way that this theory argues, then no more physical reproduction would occur and the human species would cease to exist, at least 500 years ago when Da Vinci created the Vitruvian Man. Maybe not today. Assumption number 6, that Da Vinci intended for observers to hunt for a logical way to draw our own absolutely symmetrical equilateral triangle within the Vitruvian Man schematic, and not any isosceles triangle or any other, type of triangle, given the logic that such specificity is necessary in order to accompany the absolutely symmetrical geometric archetype shapes of the circle and the square that are already in there. And there is one here, but it's not really logical. There's one here, but it doesn't have any connective points. We'll get into that, but and we're theorizing that's the only reason for this arbitrary scoring line underneath here, which has 5 ticks here, 5 ticks here, 5 more here. It's like, it's symmetrical, but it's like, what's the point of it? But it actually acts as a center point for the only equilateral triangle that can be drawn between any logical connective points in this whole schematic, as we'll show. Assumption 7 is that the only equilateral triangle logically able to be drawn between connection points within the schematic is an inverted equilateral triangle of a similar pattern to the pattern that Da Vinci shaded around the man's left eye. It's the same shape. That's the riddle. Hunt for it, the theory, where the base of the inverted equilateral triangle within the schematic forms between the two connective points where the man's in the T-pose to the physical metaphorical representation of the square, where they're touching the perimeter of the square, and the tip top of the inverted equilateral triangle, being the third connection point, is the mathematical center of the seemingly arbitrary scoring line, which we discussed, located below the square and the circle. Right there. Perfect equilateral triangle. It's the only one really logically, other than, well, this one's here. You'll see. This one is an equilateral triangle, but it connects here and here, but it connects, it's not really as big as proportionally as the other ones. Fine, it's there, but it's not inverted, it's fine, but anyway, what's the point of the seemingly arbitrary scoring line that does, you'll see, you'll make your own mind up, right? There's this possible one. Within this, it's an isosceles. The black lines are the same. Isosceles. So stop short of the thing there. Anyway, here's another isosceles triangle. So there you go. Same, different isosceles. Isosceles, sorry, well, that was a bit loud. Yeah, so, anyway, these are the same, but this is different length. Isosceles, not inverted, anyway, whatever. Isosceles. And another isosceles triangle. These are the same. Different isosceles. And given that the square in the schematic is assumed to metaphorically represent the physical realm of our existence, and that the man's fingertips are making contact with the square, in this position, and that the T-pose position there is also known as the Christ pose, and how the perimeter outline of the Christian cross also forms an inverted equilateral triangle, and how this outline shape 100% matches the outline shape Leonardo da Vinci shaded around the man's left eye. Might we say hunt over, riddle solved? I don't know. The idea or theory is that this is all about how Leonardo da Vinci, or how sacred geometry, made the connection between the equilateral triangle, the physical realm, and the left hemisphere of mind. Assumption 8. Assumption 8 is that the only significant purpose for the scoring line of a seeming arbitrary nature is to supply a mathematical center point for the only logical equilateral triangle that can be drawn within the schematic, meaning to be logically formed between any contact points of symmetry, contact points with any logical contact points within the schematic, and that the scoring line only has the appearance of having any other purpose of significance. Assumption 9. The fact that the equilateral triangle is inverted may be hinting towards some sort of possibly signal of distress, possibly the distress caused for those that inevitably metaphysically or physically run downstream of when an unhinged triangulated conscious mind begins illogically inverting metaphysical reality in order to suit their own self-serving purposes and pleasures. Assumption 10. The fact that the vertically tipped portion, this little bit below the square and the circle, of the, this little, anyway, that once it has been drawn onto the schematic, like as so, it's seen to be breaching the circle. Say this is universal metaphysical law. It's outside. Perhaps provides an indicator, an additional indicator for the above discussed suspected sign of distress, that when minds become dangerously unbalanced or triangulated, perhaps the human persona or ego or whatever can metaphysically be considered distressingly larger than life. Outside of the circle there, in how when the tip portion breaches the perimeter of the spiritual realm, it's breaching, as theorized to be the metaphorical macrocosmically represented spiritual realm, the circle. The tip portion visually, eerily, metaphorically reminds of a possible pattern behavioral disorder, such as within megalomania, sociopathy, psychopathy, narcissistic disorders, God complexes, etc., where one's personality or persona has grown to a metaphysical position or point to which is beyond where any connection to higher dimensionality and or connection to consciousness, theorized to be manifested through the unconscious right hemisphere of the brain, of the mind or brain, can't be maintained anymore. It's megalomania. It's just a theory, or you can consider it a breakaway. It's breaking away, like breaking away from humanity mindset, like elitism, mental condition of elitism, breakaway, whatever. Assumption 11, the three line segments that form within the perimeter of the circle when the man is in this X position, these three line segments are all equal length, indicating symmetry and balance. Assumption 12 is that when you draw a center line right down the gut, there's tick marks up on top and below. Draw it right up the center. The body lines up perfectly center, like that. But the head is tilting to the right, towards the circle. The idea is that's a warning, or not a warning, but a tilt towards consciousness. You can see it. It's tilting towards the right. It's splitting down here, and it's tilting noticeably towards the right hemisphere of the schematic and of mind, metaphorically.